Many years ago, when I studied law, there were mistakes I had made in terms of organising my life around study. And what I would like to do today is just pass on some of those tips. And some of them you may think are old hat, you know about them. But anyway, it's what I benefited from. So, for example, when you get a coursework, and you've got a month or whatever to submit, instead of accepting that invitation to a party or some social event and decline that, make that sacrifice and get on with the work for the coursework immediately. And you'll probably find then you finish in good time to really go through it and maybe have a word with your lecturer or your tutor about it, and that way achieve a much better mark, rather than think, well, I've got a month to do this, or a month and a bit, or whatever it is, so there's no harm in me going to that party or whatever, or that social event. And then what you do, something else happens in life, inevitably, that's how life is, and so you have to delay it further, and you can quickly end up in a situation where you're asking your tutor or a lecturer to have an extension of time, and they'll probably grant that quite easily in the first instance, but if you're continually running into that position, they'll want some reason why that has happened, so you may have to fake illness and go along and get a sick note or whatever it is, wasting further time. So the tip here is, as soon as you get work, no matter what anybody else is doing, commence it immediately. And don't listen to those people who are getting really good marks and brag and say, I never did any work. I hardly read at all. So it's not what they achieve by what little they do, but what you're going to achieve. And I remember from my days of lecturing that this on the law course, the LLB, and on courses like the Association of Accounting Technicians, the law element there, including the Association of Certified Accountants and Association of Administrators, I think it was. I had students who you could classify as brilliant, others mediocre, and some who were struggling. And more often than not, I found it wasn't the bright ones that always did well, but those who were consistent in their studies. So being consistent is very important. Don't procrastinate. So if you're ready to do some work and you think, my room's a mess, I'll get up early to study, but then you end up tidying your room as an excuse before you study. And then it's time for a coffee or tea or some breakfast, so you'll think you'll have that, and before you know it, someone's on the phone to you and they're meeting up in town for whatever it is, and you go and join them, and goodbye to your studies. So if you've got a messy desk, it doesn't matter, move the stuff out of the way and start working. If you want to get stuff into your head and remember it, from a little bit of reading I did, and I'm not a specialist in this area, there's short-term memory, they call the dustbin memory, there's medium-term and long-term, and to get it into medium-term and then long-term, you've got to keep reviewing the information. That doesn't mean you have to keep reading the same case if you wanted to get in your head again and again and again. You can review it in different ways. So if you use a recording of someone talking about the case, that's one way of reviewing it. If you write down the salient notes about it, or what the decision was, just some quick notes, that's a way of reviewing it. Reading the case again from the textbook or whatever it is, going online and finding the actual judgment and reading what the judges actually said without even taking notes about it, but just to review what you've studied. Another way of reviewing it is sitting down discussing it with your friends who are also studying with you, if you can form a study group. And of course, one other way, which is really good, that I found out after I'd finished studying, was actually teaching other people about it. So when I ended up as a lecturer, I suddenly realised the first subject I was teaching was contract. I'd remembered about 20–30% of what I'd studied, so I had to start reading again. And then the process of that lecturing, that the same material again and again, that process of talking about it really got that information to sink into my long-term memory. So you can lecture to yourself in an empty room. I remember when I got my first job as a lecturer, London School of Accountancy it was, and I was lecturing on going to lecture on all the accountancy courses that had a law element in them. And part of that was to train yourself to project your voice. So what I did in the evenings, I'd go to an empty lecture theatre and start lecturing to an empty lecture theatre. Well, you can do the same thing in your room or wherever it is you're staying, even if people think you're a little mad. So there's some of the things I used to do to help me get the information to my head. So writing it down, reading it, seeing it, hearing it, and then practicing talking about it. Those little notes that you can write out, and they have a sticky edge and you can stick on a mirror or on the wall in your room or wherever it is, with some of the, if you're trying to get the case name and the date into your head or what the decision was, just a few lines and stick it on the wall. I remember when I was studying my law degrees, I lived in a flat in Central Services building on the campus, which is pretty handy. So as I walked into my room, I had a wall on the right hand side, and I just used to put my stickers there each time I had a new case. And soon that whole side of the wall was covered with the stickers, and I made a habit of, when I walked in, read what was on the wall. That was at the end of the day when I had some time to myself. So I'd read it again and again and again, the same sort of thing. And then, of course, very, very importantly is try, I said reading, writing, seeing, etc. Try writing it out and see if you can do it from memory, and see how quick you can do that as well, because don't forget your examinations are going to be timed tests of your knowledge. So I hope this has helped a little bit. I just want to finish off with a bit of an amusing experience that I had. I was saying that when I got a job as a trainee lecturer in law at London School of Accountancy, I had 6 months of training. Actually, before the 6 months, a lecturer left and I had to last minute step in. So it wasn't 6 months, it was more like 3 months. But while I was practicing, talking to an empty lecture theatre, there was a knock on the door and two students asked me what they didn't even question that this looked like a madman lecturing to an empty theatre. They just asked me, what are you lecturing about? As though it's perfectly normal. And I said, contract law. They said, what area? And I told them, they said, oh, we've got a test on that next week. Can we just sit in and listen? So they sat in, they listened, and I carried on. They were very grateful. But then I got a telling off a couple of days later in the lecturer's common room, because they weren't my students and they were the students of another lecturer, and he felt annoyed that if I had taught them the wrong stuff and they failed, it's my fault, whereas they're his responsibility. So that was an experience I had, and he told me off in front of the whole lecturer's restroom, where we had a restroom, but we had our own desks, and there was a central desk, and there was another lecturer there, and he was helping a couple of students with some questions they had. So I quickly took this lecturer who told me off behind the coffee screen and asked if he'd like a tea or coffee. I got him a coffee, and I said, what you did was correct to point out my mistake, but don't do it in front of people again. So I was able to tell him that, and he accepted that. So there were some of the experiences I've been through in where I found information has really helped me. And then with cases, if you can have what are called memory hooks, so that you can remember a case by associating it with something. So I remember there was a case about a person who bought a Range Rover in 1981, and in those days vehicles or goods had to be of merchantable quality. It's now satisfactory quality, and he had rejected a Range Rover. A few things had gone wrong with it, but one of the things he was complaining about, that there was a scratch on the bodywork, and cases up until that point had been ruling that the judges had been saying, if the vehicle does what it says on the can, it takes you from A to B, it's of merchantable quality or satisfactory quality now. And he was complaining there was a scratch on it. When it went on appeal, the judge sided with him and said, when you're spending so much money on a vehicle, and in 1981, a Range Rover, I can't remember how much it cost, you're entitled to take pride in the vehicle. And so the fact that it was scratched meant he could return it. So it gave us a new meaning of what merchantable quality or satisfactory quality meant. But I remember, I think the case is Roger and Parish, so I called it Roger the Range Rover case, and that's how it helped me assimilate the facts and remember what happened. I hope this has been helpful to budding students who are hoping to do very well in the law.